Hello, welcome once again to Pale Blooms and Beyond. Thank you for joining us today. John Howard is an English singer, songwriter, pianist, and author. John is probably best known for his 1975 album, Kid in a Big World. Unfortunately, that album, plus two others from the mid 70s, went largely overlooked at the time. Fortunately, there was a renewed interest in John's music in the new millennium, and all three albums have been re-released. In the interim, Mr. Howard moved to the business side of music and had a successful career in A&R from 1985 to 2000. After this musical revival, John has released some 18 studio albums and 11 EPs. He has published his autobiography in a couple of volumes. Well, welcome, John.
Hi there, Greg.
Nice for you to meet me today. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Absolute pleasure.
So let's go back a few years. So you were born in, is it Bury?
Bury in Lancashire, yeah.
In Lancashire, in northwest England.
Right.
I don't want to tread too much material that may already be in your autobiography, but how was your childhood?
At home was great. I had great parents. My dad was a jazz pianist, which obviously is what influenced me. At school, not so good. When I was a very small kid, we were in another Lancashire town called Haywood, which is like an old cotton mill town. And that was great. But then when we moved to Bury when I was 7, the school I was sent to was incredibly rough. and beyond me being able to cope with it, really, I ended up being bullied. I was incredibly thin and skinny and weak and all the rest of it. So obviously, you get, and also the odd thing was that Haywood and Bury, I think, are 11 miles from each other, but the accent is quite different.
Okay.
And the accent in Bury is much harder, if you like. So the fact that I had a different accent, I was incredibly thin. I wasn't, I wasn't particularly gregarious in those days. So you end up being a bit bullied, by the other kids and all the rest of it. So it was quite difficult until I got into secondary school, and then things started picking up from there. From the age of about 11, things were fine there. I discovered I could sing and play, and I used to end up doing little concerts for the students and that sort of stuff. So being different is one thing. Being different with a bit of talent is a better thing to be,
Exactly. You're right. You're right. Well, do you recall early on music being played in the household?
Which one?
Any music that you recall when you were
Oh, in
younger?
the house.
In the house, yeah.
Yeah. Well, my dad was in a band at the time, a jazz band. And so he would bring home records like Deborah Brick's Take 5, which was amazing. And also he used to bring home things like West Side Story soundtracks and South Pacific and My Fair Lady. So from a really young age, I got to hear all these amazing songs with these incredible lyrics. And then, of course, with the Take 5 thing, the odd time signature, the 5/4 time signature, which my dad showed me. I asked him, I said, "What is that? It's so weird." So he showed me how to play it on there, and I kind of was brought up with not your usual pop music, I suppose. It was very much, as a jazz musicals. On the Street Where You Live, I think, was the very first song I fell in love with, because I loved all those internal rhymes, that it has.
Yeah.
And then upstairs in my sister's bedroom was Cliff Richard, day and night. So she just played Cliff Richard day and night until the Beatles came along, and then Cliff was out the window, and suddenly Paul McCartney was God,
Well, at least Cliff had one fan. Well, I know he had many fans, but I hear quite a few that I talked to on this channel that prefer the Shadows, solo material. than the Cliffs. But yeah, he's had a really nice career himself. Um, you talked about your dad being, musically inclined. How about your mom? Was she at all, or no?
Not at all. She couldn't sing a note if she was paid. She was absolutely terrible. Um, but she definitely encouraged me, because I wanted to play the piano from I think I was 5, something like that.
Yeah.
And so I was sent to lessons when I was 7, and she used to really encourage me to practice, and she used to sit and listen to what I was doing. So she loved music. My mum absolutely loved music. Um, I mean, she loved all my sister when she bought the Beatles records, or I bought a Sonny and Cher LP, or a Dusty Springfield album, or whatever. She used to sit and listen to it with me. She really enjoyed it. And then when I bought Sergeant Pepper home, she was a little bit more concerned, I think. I think she
Okay.
found it quite strange. But yeah, but so it was a good upbringing, and that one was encouraged to do what you wanted to do in a way. I wasn't forced to become a doctor or a lawyer or whatever else. It was really what I wanted to do, and it was always music, really.
Yeah. Well, that's good to hear because you hear about so many musicians starting out and their parents were discouraging, and say, well, you need something more stable. You need something, that you're going to have retirement, benefits. You need something, and it's where they came from. I'm sure I know. And they're looking out for your best interest at heart.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you did start taking lessons. What, at 7? I mean, very early on. And did you start as a teenager? What kind of music were you into at that time, or artist and musician?
Well, I think I got really into pop music in a big way in '63. So I was 10, when the British Merseybeat boom happened, and all these incredible artists suddenly just literally bounced onto the TV you'd never seen before. The Beatles, Joey and the Pacemakers, the Stones, the Hollies, Dusty Siller, all these incredible artists, wonderful records. So I started buying records, I think, when I was about 11. I think Hold Me by PJ Crowley was the first, the first
Oh,
thing I bought. And why I love that record so much is I thought he had a great voice, but it was the self-harmonizing on the record. He harmonized with himself.
yeah,
I love that. That really intrigued me. And Gene Pitney used to do the same thing. And so I must have already had this sort of ear of, oh, that's unusual. That's an interesting recording technique, which I think followed me all the way through my life. So I'd buy those sort of records, and the first LP I bought was Look at Us by Sonny and Cher, because again I loved her voice, and I loved their Phil Spector type productions. Um, and then obviously then Dylan didn't really touch me until '65, when I heard Like a Rolling Stone on the radio. That's the first time I'd heard him, but to be quite honest, a friend of mine at school loved The Times They Were Changing.
uh,
And when I heard it, I thought it was some old man. I thought it was some ancient old man that was singing folk songs in a cafe or something. I mean, I'd never seen him. This voice sounded so old. Whether it was because he was trying to do Woody Guthrie, or I'm not sure, but then, Like a Rolling Stone came out, I think it was summer '65, and I was just astonished when I heard this on the radio. And when this guy afterwards said, that's Bob Dylan's new single, it was just like, oh my God, this is like a world away. It was like, and it was in like, I think Times Were Changing came out in the UK early '65, and by 4 months later, Like a Rolling Stone was out. It was this incredibly different sound. And that just blew me apart. I just love that record so much. And then Positively 4th Street, just as amazing. So dashed out and bought those. So I think I consider myself really lucky to have been born when I was, and to fall in love with pop music when I did, because it was just that whole period of every new Beatles record was different from the last. The Stones were getting better and better. Then they started writing their own songs, and then it was fantastic.
right.
Right into '66, and Donovan suddenly stopped doing the Dylan thing and became this electric superstar, and I loved all that. And then harmony pop came in, and Mamas and Papas. Um, and then Pink Floyd, see Emily play, and all. So it's just like, I think from the age of 10 to, well, really, right to the end of the teens, every year seemed to bring out something incredible in pop, for me anyway. And I know it's very easy now, you say, oh, well, when you're young, the pop music you love at the time is always the best pop music. And of course, that's true. But I think because the techniques, the studio techniques and the songwriting techniques, and because all these songwriters were bouncing off each other, like the Stones would hear a new Beatles song and then try and do something similar, and then the Beatles heard Dylan and they tried to do, or Lennon especially, tried to sort of capture that sound, and then the Phil Spector sound, and so then you got the Walker Brothers and Dusty, all these people sort of trying to do the Phil Spector sound. So there was all this sort of ricocheting of sound and production techniques, and I don't think that happened again, because as the studio technology got more and more sophisticated, things became easier. So you didn't have to, spend hours cutting bits of tape together to get a sound effect. Do you know what I mean?
Right. And in a way, it kind of made musicians a little lazier, I guess, in a way, And
yeah, I think it probably did. I think it probably did.
Sometimes, having to work for something is when it pays off, you appreciate it a little bit more. But it is what it is. At what age did you start singing?
Well, I think I started singing because I started writing, and that would have been about when I was about 12 or 13. I mean, they were terrible little songs, but I thought they were fantastic. and I used to sort of sing them to friends and that sort of stuff. But when I was 14, after being nagged for months, my parents bought me a tape recorder that you could multi-track on. You couldn't really mix, so the more you multi-track, the more you overdub, the worse the sound got, But to me, it was a revelation. And again, to be able to double track my voice or harmonize with myself and get salt cellars out of the cupboard and, bang on my knees or bang on a book and overdo all these things. And that's when I really started loving singing, when you could get these effects on your voice and when you could hear it double tracked and sound almost like a record. And I think that's probably, so I was, about 14 when I actually really thought, I love doing this. And then I played some of my stuff to my sister. My sister was completely unaware that I was doing any of this, because she got married by then. I think, yes, she had, and moved away. And when she said, oh my God, I had no idea, these are fantastic. And she was quite a hard critic. So for her to say she liked what I was doing, I thought, well, there's got to be something there.
Right. You trusted her taste.
Yes, absolutely. Because she was into Engelbert Humperdinck by then. So, our tastes were completely opposite. But the fact she liked what I was doing, I thought, well, at least she's honest. She'd have told me if she thought it was rubbish straight away.
Right. Well, I have to say, for any piano player, keyboard player who also sings, I think it really takes quite a bit of talent, because, or really any instrument for that matter. But I think particularly the piano, because I've heard it is a little more difficult than, let's say, the guitar to learn. But to be able to do that, simultaneously, to be able to sing and and you're not just having to focus on your fingers, what keys you're playing. So I really admire that. And anybody that's a musician and singer. In the early '70s, you dropped the H from your first name and went by Jon, which is my brother's name, Jon.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, in fact, the reason for that was I was actually born Howard Jones. That's my birth name is Howard Jones. But I changed it because I thought Howard Jones was such a terrible name for a pop star,
Yeah, and then later, yeah.
And then later, 10 years later, lo and behold. And so I thought, I've got to come up with something. And I was working as a postman at the time in this village that my parents had moved to called Ramsbottom, which is about another 5 miles from Bury. I was working this postman, and on my rounds, I used to think, what can I call myself? I was thinking, because by then I was, yes, I was starting to gig by that time. I was starting to do the folk clubs and this, that, and the other. But I was still trying to come up with a name. And there was Rod Stewart, John Lennon, Bob Dylan. I thought, well, it's got to be a single syllable Christian name and a two-syllable surname. That seemed to be, you know, the best thing to have. I ignored Paul McCartney and George Harrison. We won't worry about those. Let's do John Lennon and Bob Dylan. And so then that's when I thought, well, Howard, I'll make that surname and put Jon of Jones in front of that, and that became, oh, lo and behold, John Howard. So I was John Howard, Jon for, until I got to London in '73. My manager thought the H looked much more English, upper class type of name, you know. I don't know why, but he thought it just looked more solid, he said. So he put the H and I didn't, you know. And but at my early gigs with like Spyro Gyra that I did in the early '70s, in the Bolton Octagon and other places, I'm always billed as John Howard.
Oh, okay.
So that wasn't my idea, but I stuck with it. I thought, well, he must know this guy. You know, he's a London manager and a publisher, so I'll let him put the H in. That's fine.
Right. Well, you know, I mentioned my brother's name was Jon. His middle name is Christopher without the H. C
Okay.
R C R I. So I think my parents had a problem with H. I don't know what it was. I don't know. They didn't like the letter H. Well, who was it? I found this really interesting from an early incarnation of Iron Maiden that asked you to sing lead. How did that come about?
um, I think this incarnation I made more earlier than the heavy metal one. Because I don't think the heavy metal band would have come anywhere near me to be their lead singer. I don't think I sort of fit the bill really, but I was, again, it was an Octagon, because I used to do these things at the Octagon Theatre in Bolton, which is a famous theatre up in Lancashire. And they do plays and all that sort of stuff. But they also used to do something called bluesologies. And they were like Saturday afternoon gigs, and they'd have 4 or 5 artists performing. And I used to do quite a lot of those, and that was through them I met Spyro Gyra, who then asked me to support them. But I was in my dressing room, and I think I'd done my 45-minute set. And those are the days when you're even given your own dressing room. So I got a dressing room of my own, and I'm sitting in there. And these two guys came in, and they said, "Hi, you know, we're in the band I'm Maiden, and we're on the same bill as you today." And I said, "Oh, well, you know, it's nice to meet you. And our lead singer's leaving today, and we love your voice. So will you come and sing? You know, be our lead singer." And it was very sweet, but I had made my mind up quite early on that I was going to be a solo artist. I didn't want to be in a band. I don't know why, but that was always my thing. And I also thought, if I join a band, then I lose John Howard, the artist, if you like. And I always wanted to sort of keep that. So I said no, but they split up a couple of years later, and then whether Iron Maiden knew that name and took it as their own, or Iron Maiden was quite a famous thing anyway, wasn't it? It was an old machine in the mills and things. Yeah, so it wasn't the leather-clad heavy metal screaming at the top of my voice.
Right.
They did very sort of like damsels in distress in market squares in the 17th century. So it's quite different, really.
Okay. All right. All right. A little bit different.
A little bit.
Well, you mentioned Spyro Gyra. That's a band that I would like to. What I've heard of their material, I really enjoy, but they're very hard, at least over here, to find any CDs or material. I do have an album of demos.
Okay.
That's it. But it's one of those bands that's really rare to find anything. But anytime you go, like to a record store or whatever, and you look under Spyro Gyra, it's that jazz American band.
Oh yeah, that's right. It's slightly different spelling, isn't it? But yeah,
It's 2 words,
that's
Spyro Gyra instead of 1 word.
that's
So
right.
it's always the one that you find. Well, did you enjoy that support slot with Spiral Gyra?
They were great. I think I had 2 or maybe even 3. They were managed at the time by a guy called Max Hole, who ended up he ended up as the head honcho at Universal, but at the time he was just another hippie that we're all hippies and all sat in the bar together. And he was a really very erudite, intelligent man. Liked him a lot. He approached me when I did one of the Octagons, he said, because I'd done a gig where there were like 4 or 5 artists, and Spiral Gyra were one of them. And we'd all gone very well, and I loved their music. I thought they were absolutely incredible. And he said, would you like to support Spiral Gyra? I said, that'd be lovely. So I did a Christmas one in 71, and I did another one in January 71, then I did one in February 73. But by that time, they were like splitting, they were sort of, I think it ended up with just Martin Cockerham and Barbara Gaskin. I think they just went off and did their own thing after that. They were lovely gigs, and they were always really nice. And Martin was always really lovely to talk to. Again, very, very intelligent boy. I think they all met at Canterbury University. I think that's how they all met. But because Martin was from the Bolton area, he was like a local hero. So whenever they appeared at the Octagon, it was packed for one thing, and the audience were really in a great mood. So to play to an audience like that, who liked what I was doing, and then they'd get to know me better as well, because I did 2 or 3 with them. That gave me an audience, and so they started coming to see me when I was doing other gigs as well, and I built up quite a little following in the Lancashire area, partly because of them. But the ironic thing about Max Hole is that after Spiral Gyra split, and 10 years later, he became A&R director at Warner's, and he signed Howard Jones.
Isn't that something? Yeah.
I think he might have thought it was me, but anyway.
You weren't able to shake that stigma,
Yeah, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Yes. And Howard Jones's name is John Howard Jones. That's his real
name. Yeah, isn't that something? I've read that.
Yeah.
It says you guys are forever to be linked, right?
I'm not sure how he feels about that. I'm not.
That'd be interesting to find out.
Yes.
So why the move to London in 73?
Basically, I knew I had to do it because in the 70s, unless you were based in London, you couldn't really get signed. You couldn't find a manager, you couldn't find a publisher or a record company or anything. And I started in 1970 doing all the folk clubs. As I said, building up a nice following. I'd do these things where they do open mic nights at the folk clubs, and then if they liked you, they offered you a guest night, so you ended up just doing a night of your own. And in those days, I used to write a whole set of songs just for that night. God Almighty, it's so creative. But I knew that I couldn't do this. If I was wanted to do more than this, I had to leave. And it was very lucky because I was playing at a folk club in Manchester. I can't remember the name now. And a chap called Peter Gronau, I think his name is pronounced, Gronau, came up to me and said, I really love your music, and I work for Polydor. He said, I'm not in A&R, but I work for Polydor, and I think if I could do a tape of what you're doing and play it to the guys at Polydor, I think they'd love it. He said, but you'd have to come to London. And so I said, well, great. I said, but I've no one. He said, stay with us. My wife, and his wife is there, Anne. He said, my wife and I are very happy to put you up in our house. He said, but just to warn you, we have 5 children, so it's a madhouse. So you're moving into a complete madhouse. So I took them up that way, and he came up to the Civic Hall in Ramsbottom, and for about an hour he recorded all my songs. Went back to London with the tape. Then I went down to London, stayed with them. And then one night, bless him, he came home and he said, the guys at Polydor don't like your stuff at all. I'm sorry. It's just, I love what you do, but they're just not keen. He said they just can't hear any hits or anything. So I said, that's all right, don't worry. But by that time, I'd started playing at clubs in London. I was doing the Troubadour in Earl's Court. And another guy, Stuart Reed, who was a publisher, he was the head of pop music publishing at Chappell's at the time. He and his wife were recommended to me by a guy called Brian Keith, who used to be in Plastic Penny in the Congregation in the 60s, 70s, yeah, he was the lead singer. So anyway, they came along, and the next day he signed me up, and that began the journey. So that was only within a month of me arriving in London. So I did the right thing, really.
Right. Did you think it was a bit fast, or did you expect it in a way to be fast?
Well, the arrogance of youth, probably, yes. but looking back, I think it was too quick. I think it was much too fast. Yeah. Looking back now, as one does, I think probably looking at the way things went, I think if I'd have done what I did in Manchester and spent 3 or 4 years building up a following on the live circuit, which I was beginning to do in London, but only like for 2 weeks, 3 weeks. I got a guest night at the Troubadour and at the same thing. And I thought, this is working well. As soon as I signed to Stuart, he had a plan, and the plan was no more live gigs, take him out of the system, put him into the studio, get all the songs demoed, get a record deal, then he becomes a star. I mean, in his head, there was no other thing going to happen, which at the age of 20 was like, wow, this is amazing. Great. But I think if I'd have had 3 or 4 years to build up a proper following in London and gradually get talked about and word of mouth, I think it would have been a very different John Howard, I think, that would have emerged. Because when I arrived in London, I was a hippie with hair down to my knees, virtually. I was, typical hippie. And Stuart, I think for all the right reasons, but he decided, this guy's got great bone structure, he's skinny, he'll look great in a suit and get his hair cut and make him look, like amazing. And he took me to all the best restaurants in London and basically taught me how to behave in cultured company, if you like, and how to, so just being with all these people who were all basically publishers and writers, and people like Mitch Merry, who wrote a lot of pop hits in the 60s. He was great friends with them, and Les Reed, who wrote all those Tom Jones hits and stuff. So it wasn't what we call a pop music entourage I had. It was much more kind of middle of the road, kind of show business. It was show business. And he thought, this is the right route for him. So I think if I'd have not signed to Stuart, and bless him, he did everything for all the right reasons, I think I'd have probably, Kid in a Big World probably wouldn't have happened. So, I mean, that would have been sad because it's a good album. But it would have been a different album. I always saw myself as like Roy Harper with a piano. That's how I always saw myself. And I think that's the kind of album I probably would have made in time, But whether that's right or wrong, and whether I would have made it in that guise, I have no idea. But I did have to become somebody else, to fit this image, which is the one you see on the sleeve, of course.
Right, yeah. Well, you were signed to CBS, and the H got put back in your name.
Yes.
And you recorded "Kid in a Big World." I didn't realize this. Abbey Road and Apple are 2 different studios.
They are.
Yeah. Okay. So at Abbey Road and Apple Studio, you recorded it. How was it recording in these 2 studios?
Well, for a Beatles fanatic as I was by then, and had been since Strawberry Fields Forever. I think Strawberry Fields Forever was the Beatles song record that made me go, oh my God, these are gods. It was incredible, because you walk into the building, the Abbey Road building, and up those steps and through that door, and go to reception and say, my name's John Howard, Studio 2. And so, you sent to Studio 2, there's the staircase, there's the big grand piano, there's this enormous room. And I used to buy Beatles Monthly every month, and there were always pictures of Abbey Road Studios and all this stuff. And I was here, here I was. And the guy who was engineering was Peter Bound, who'd worked with Pink Floyd and the Beatles and a lot of big stars in the 60s and 70s. That was an incredible experience, it really was. And then to have the opportunity to go to Apple, which was in Savile Row then.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a different studio to the one that you see in Get Back. In Get Back, it was like a homemade studio because Magic Mark, whatever it was called, he just screwed it all up. So they had to get in, had to get a proper desk in for them and all that, if you remember. By the time I was at Apple, it had been completely renovated with this beautiful, brand new studio, this gorgeous big grand piano. And again, it was Ian McDonald, Phil McDonald engineered that. Well, he worked with Lennon on Instant Karma and Imagine, and he worked on the White Album. So it was like a Beatles fest for me. It was fantastic. It was fantastic. It really was. And the sessions were interesting. I mean, I think at the time, although I was happy about it, it was quite difficult because Tony Meehan, who was producing the album Abbey Road, although he liked my songs a lot, and Stuart had given him a tape, I think, of 20 demos, and he picked 10 songs, he decided he wanted to change nearly all the arrangements, not all of them, but nearly all the arrangements, radically change them. So if you listen to any of those demos that have just come out, the Kid in a Big World plus the original demos, things like Missing Key, things like Maybe Someday in Miami, and Kid in a Big World, and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. My demos were so different, and he decided he wanted what he wanted was an album. He said, if we want to make this like a Beatles album, we want every track to be different. We want them all to show different sides of your writing, of your style. Whereas my manager just wanted basically backing to all my demos. That's really what he wanted. He wanted the songs to stay as they were and just have backing, an orchestra and a band. Well, Tony had completely different ideas. But I'd really been given no warning about this. So when we got to the session, every time he'd come to the piano and just teach me a new way of playing Missing Key, completely different. He said, don't do all that decorative piano motif thing, simplify it. Pretend you're Paul McCartney, chords. And when you get into the chorus, do that sort of kick thing that he does in Golden Slumbers. So, so I was relearning my own songs before the session even started. And dear old Bob Hendrich on drums and Dave Winter on bass were just sort of sitting there going, okay. And then gradually they'd start joining in, and then we'd routine it, and then it would be ready for a take. But it made the sessions very long, and my manager was in the control room windows. I mean, he was going mad. He was going crazy, because these weren't the songs. These weren't the way he heard them at all. And he and Tony did not get on. It was so there was a weird atmosphere. So what really, in a way, should have been an amazing experience. It was great. I loved it. Being in the studios, recording my own songs for CBS. At Abbey Road, but the actual atmosphere was quite tetchy at times.
Ask you about that. So did Paul Phillips produce at Apple then?
Paul was the A&R manager at CBS. He's the guy who actually signed me, and he wanted to produce me, but they wanted a name, which is why Tony got the gig. But when Stuart delivered the tapes of Kid in a Big World to CBS in probably July, August. Because we started in April, May, June, July, 3 or 4 months we were there. And things went very quiet. They didn't really respond, and we thought this is strange. And then they invited us me and my manager, to the summer conference, the sales conference at CBS, which was down in Devon. And while we were there, Paul Phillips approached us and came and sat down and said, look, we really like most of the album. We think there's some great tracks on it, but we don't like what Tony's done with Kid in a Big World, because he did this like a palm court orchestra arrangement, you know, like a 1930s crooner type thing. He said, we don't think that's right. The way you did it on the original demo with just piano voice, I want to do that and just bring some strings in, but basically do what you wrote. And the same with Family Man. He didn't like, because Tony brought in Rod Argent to play Move on Family Man. It was great. It was lots of fun. But it sort of got in the way a bit of the simplicity of the song, if you like. So he said, I want to take that back to your demo, and again, put a nice string arrangement on that. Well, Stuart was sitting there at the time, and he just said, thank God for that.
Right.
So that, and he said, and so you're not too disappointed about having to redo 2 songs. He said, I booked at Apple Studios. So he said, so now you've done the whole Beatles experience, you know. And they were much happier sessions after, because Stuart was like in his element, you know, saying, oh, this is where they should sound. And I suppose I never felt comfortable with the palm court thing with Kid in a Big World. It always felt a bit alien. And Tony wanted me to, again, do like a McCartney Honey Pie type vocal, you know, it's all posh and BBC, which was a lovely idea, but it just never felt right to me. Although Harry Gold, who did the arrangement, he was a legendary 30s, 40s swing band leader. He used to have a band called Pieces of Eight, and they were on BBC Radio all the time during the war. But it never felt right. But we kept, Harry did the arrangement for Maybe Someday in Miami, and that's the same thing, you know, that sort of swing band thing. Yeah. Which I was quite happy about. That sort of kind of worked, you know, quite well, because I'd always seen that as like a Brian Ferry Roxy Music type of vibe. And although it lost that, which if you listen again to the demo of that, that's much more that Roxy Music approach in the way I'm singing it. I managed still to do the sort of slight camp Brian Ferry thing through that, so that was all right. I was quite comfortable with that. So we kept that. And Guess Who's Coming to Dinner also had Rod Argent on it as well, and he did all those sound effects of the gun shooting and the Marvel comics and the woo sounds, which Stuart hated, but we kept that because it was a great track. You know, it really worked really well. Because Stuart saw that as my Noel Coward, you see, whereas Tony said, no, we're going to make this to a big rock track.
Right.
You know.
Well, I first heard Goodbye Susie. I got a copy of that, a Zigzag 20 Junk Shop soft rock singles. I picked up that. And that's where I first heard the song. It's got some other good tracks on it too. 70 to 74, yeah. Was that, let me ask you, written about anyone in particular, Susie?
No, most of my songs are not, because I write a lot of story songs, as you probably know. There's probably elements of people I've known. I think probably a couple of the students at art college may have slightly influenced Goodbye Susie a little. Because there was quite a lot of partying at art college, as you can imagine, and a few sort of disasters here and there. So, but no, there never was a Susie James. A good friend of mine now is a lady called Sue James, and I said, it's not about you. Long before I met you. No, I mean, there's another song of mine years later called Believe Me, Richard, and a lot of my friends said, who's Richard? I said, well, it doesn't really exist, but he's like an amalgam of maybe 6 or 7 people I knew. So you put them all in, you know. And it could just be one line or a verse that comes in, and then I change everything, and it all melds itself into a story, which is imaginary, you know.
Well, CBS was in high gear promoting you, but BBC Radio 1 wouldn't play the song.
That's right.
Yeah, sad as it's very radio friendly. Yeah. And then also the pinheads at the BBC refused to play Family Man.
Yeah.
Because their reasoning was it was anti-woman.
They said that about Family Man, and Goodbye Susie was too depressing for our audience. That's what that was there. So too depressing.
I don't get that anti-woman because think about other songs that got airplay: Black Magic Woman, Devil Woman, Evil Woman, Witchy Woman, Eagles. There was a lot, that were more blatantly anti. You know, I
Yeah,
just
absolutely. And Family Man is Paul Phillips used to call Family Man my Blackpool postcard song. It was like one of those cartoon things. It's a cartoon family, and it's not about a woman. It's Family Man. It's like this guy is in this situation, which is probably in like a real suburban family man, and he
right,
wants to break out, and his kids are in a mess, and his relationship's in a mess, and he's got this other woman, a mistress, and it was never against women. If anything, it was like looking at the guy saying, this guy's a mess, and that was really what it was supposed to be about. But do you know the story of how I discovered many years later why they decided not to play me? Do you know that story?
yes, I think I do. Yes, I do. Yes, I do.
Yeah,
And that makes a little bit more sense. Um,
a lot more sense.
yeah. Um, and so at that time, if you weren't played on BBC Radio 1, then you really didn't have a shot at hitting the big. Yeah. Yeah, that's unfortunate because I know you got played some on what was it, Radio
That's
Caroline or
Radio Luxembourg.
Luxembourg? Yeah, I know you got some airplay.
I did.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's that definitely unfortunate. Um, Hopefully times have changed a little bit and a little bit more open-minded these days.
Yeah, yeah. I don't think anybody gives a damn anymore. And it's one of those things where I was unaware of it, and in fact, the chap who blocked me, if you like, at the playlist committee of Radio 1, I met him. I did a launch concert at the Purcell Room in London, Fork in the Big World, which CBS put on, and they invited all the media and journalists and radio people. And I met him and chatted to him, and we got on really well. And then he came, my manager had a little party afterwards at his office, invited more people along to that. And there's a picture of me actually talking to him in one of the CD booklets of Kid in the Big World, the one that RPM put out, I think. We got on extremely well, but I learned many years later that he was the guy who said, we are not playing him at Radio 1. He's just too gay, basically. Mark Bowen was camp, Bowie was camp, glam rock was camp, but these were all straight men,
Right.
with families or whatever, just dressing up. And I think Radio 1 sort of managed to sort of be okay with that. But I never hid my sexuality, but I never thought I sort of, pushed it down people's throat or I never came on to people or anything like that. But, I had a real thing about it. And Paul said that he was adamant. Because after the show, Paul said he met up with him. He said, I went to him and said, isn't he fantastic? You're going to be playing his records? And he said, no. He's going nowhere near anyone. We're not touching him. And CBS had a real problem. They never got any of my records played on Radio 1 ever. The first time I got a Radio 1 player was 78 when I did a disco record with Trevor Horn. And I think by then, probably the Players Committee people had changed. It's like 3 or 4 years later. And they played me to death on Radio 1. That got lots of plays. So the stigma had gone anyway by then. The bizarre thing was that earlier in 74, before the single had come out, Goodbye Susie, and a year before the album came out, I did a session at Radio 1 for a DJ called David Hamilton. And they used to do these live sessions where you'd have a band or even on your own, and you'd sort of sing a couple of songs. And it was like, Radio 1 introducing new artists type of thing. And I sang Goodbye Susie, and I did Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, and they played it. Absolutely no trouble whatsoever, no problem whatsoever. Apparently David Hamilton said he got a lot of listeners saying, we love this song, this is great, who is this? Roll on 6-8 months later, and it's just like, oh God, no, we can't touch that record. It's too depressing.
Yeah. What justification? Yeah. Well, what was the Elton John story then? How did he get played so much? I mean, so it's okay for some, others not so okay.
Well, Elton, of course, Elton wasn't out then. Elton was way in the closet. He jammed that
Right.
closet
Right.
so tightly closed. It
Yeah.
wasn't many years later that he came out. So nobody even discussed his sexuality at the time. He was just a pianist, singer, songwriter. In those days, quite serious. Your song and the glasses and the hair.
Right.
What always amazed me was how huge he was in America and how outrageous he was
Exactly.
in America. I mean, like, huge glasses and outfits
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and I don't know,
Very.
say, to me, I would have thought America would be more anti all
Yeah.
that
You
than
would think.
Britain would be.
Yeah. You would think. Yeah. Uh, very interesting. Well, a couple of tracks I like from that first album, "Gone Away,"
Uh-huh.
really nice, and "Missing Key"
Yeah.
is another one that I go back to and listen to time and time again. Um, Now you also had recorded two albums on CBS, Technicolor Biography, and Can You Hear Me Okay?
Yeah.
Uh, Around the same time, 75-ish, right? 75.
Yeah.
And I know you had been amassing the material for a year or so. And again, CBS shelved both of them based on the negative reaction from radio. Yeah.
I don't know what the reason was. I mean, these things are, well, I think there'll always be a slight mystery because a lot of these people have gone and I wasn't told anything at the time. These were the days when artists didn't really get told very much. You were told what you were told by your A&R manager or your manager or your publisher, and that was that. There was no social media. You couldn't investigate anything. There was no internet. And CBS were always very nice to me. They were never horrible to me or anything. But when Kid in the Big World, I think when Goodbye Susie was rejected by radio, then Family Man, and I think In the Big World didn't get again the response they were expecting. I think they panicked a bit because I think they went along with Stuart's notion that I was going to be, this amazing star overnight type of thing. And with two flop singles and an album that wasn't selling, I think they began to think, this is not going to happen. So I started recording demos for the next album, Technical Biography, with Paul Phillips, who'd then become my producer. And we did basically an album's worth of demos, and Paul had got all these arrangements planned for it, and it was going to be very exciting. I was really looking forward to it. And then one day we got a phone call from Dick Asher, who was the managing director of CBS. Stuart got this call inviting us to lunch at a lovely place called Les Ambassadeurs in Park Lane. Went along there. It was all very nice and chat. And then Dick suddenly said, we're shelving Technical Biography. I said, well, we haven't even started it. We've just done the demos. He said, there are no hits. And Stuart, bless him, said, hold on. When John did his Purcell Room show 3 weeks ago, I mean, the album had only just been out 2 or 3 weeks by then. When he did his show, you came on stage when you were introducing it and said, John is not a singles artist. We are not interested in John writing hits. John is an albums artist who we will develop over several albums and build slowly. And we're quite happy to wait because we know it's going to happen. He said, what happened to that? And Dick just said, it's gone. It's not going to happen. We have to have hits. We need a hit. And I think, they probably got to that point. If we're going to keep him on the label, something has got to happen. Radio's got to love him or somebody's got to love him. So, so the Shell Technical Biography, before we even started, and he said, I'm going to put you in the studio with Biddu, who had produced Kung Fu Fighting back up. And he was working with Tina Charles at the time, I Love to Love and all that stuff. And I really liked Biddu. I knew him. He was a friend of Stuart's. And in fact, Biddu wanted to produce me in '73, but Stuart said, no, we're going with a big name. We need a big name. And Biddu then wasn't. By '75, he was like, He'd sold millions of singles with Kung Fu Fighting. And he'd signed with CBS as his own, like an orchestra, video orchestra, which is basically him, Jerry Shuri arrangements and all the rest of it. And he sort of conducted them on top of the Pops video. And then I thought, this is really bizarre. I just don't see our styles at all coming together, much as I liked him. So anyway, he said, you've got to write some hits, and we should be in the studio in about 3 weeks' time. So I had to then go back to my manager's office, and because Stuart said, what do you think afterwards? And I said, well, what's the option? We have no option. This is it. So I wrote 10 more songs, and I Got My Lady to Bidoo, and Bidoo said, that's a hit. That's a hit record, hit song. So I said, great. So what we did, we recorded I Got My Lady and Frightened Now first with Jerry Shuri. Bidoo sent them to CBS and said, do you like these? Because I'm not doing a whole album for you to turn around and say we don't like it. And they said, yes, we think they're great. And I Got My Lady, we'll put that out as a single in the summer. It's a summer smash. So then we went back in the studio. By that time, Jerry was working on, I think, probably Tina Charles stuff. So Bidoo brought in Pip Williams, who ended up producing Status Quo, as you know, another.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But Pip was beautiful. He was a lovely, lovely man, and he was going to do all the arrangements. And so he'd come into my manager's office. I'd play him a couple of my new songs. He'd record them on his little dictaphone machine, take them away and write arrangements. And 3 weeks later, we were in the studio, and we recorded the other 8 songs. And I thought, well, that's great. Bidoo, and we've come up with these songs with lots of hooks and all the rest of it. So Stuart took those tapes along, and the same thing happened, absolute silence. They just didn't respond or anything. And in the end, he rang somebody at CBS who said, we don't like it, we're not putting it out. So, and he said, why? And they just said, it's just not what we were expecting. And he actually invited a guy called Robin Blanchflower for lunch. He was then A&R, one of the A&R guys at CBS, for lunch, and to basically grill him, say, what is going on? And so we had, again, a nice lunch, da-da-da. And at the end of it, Stuart said, what is the problem with this album? We've done exactly what you asked us to do. Bidoo, Pip Williams did great arrangements, John's written some really hooky songs. I Got My Lady was going to be a summer single. That's been taken off the schedules. Why? 1 minute it's a summer smash, next minute it's not being released. And he said, well, the problem is, we were thinking John with Bidoo would have a disco album.
Okay.
And he said, what do you mean a disco album? He said, well, that's what we're expecting. And he sat there in the office, and he said, this is what we wanted. You keep me steady when pain. And honestly, he sang this song with the disco rhythm on his knees.
Right.
That's what we wanted.
That's what they wanted.
So I said, well, that ain't me. That's not what he signed, So that whole 75 was probably one of the weirdest years I've ever experienced, really.
Right. Well, when I heard Bidoo, had produced, I was a little leery. It might be a little disco-y too, but then I was pleased when I heard the album, find out it wasn't. I liked a lot of the things that he did, the orchestration and elements that he added, but glad to hear it didn't go in that direction. But off of the Technicolor biography album, I wanted to plug a couple of tracks that favorites of mine. Blink in the Darkness.
Okay.
And Hall of Mirrors.
Oh yeah.
That I really like off of that album. And then off of Can You Hear Me Okay? I think my favorite track on the whole album is You Keep Me Steady.
Okay, the one that nearly became a disco track.
I can see that, but I'm glad it didn't. Because I like it better.
It's a beautiful orchestration, isn't it? It's just fantastic.
Yeah, it is. It is on that one. So in '76, you left CBS. Don't blame you at all. And then late in the year, you talk a little bit about this. You fell and ouch, broke your back and your feet.
Yeah.
Yeah. What happened there? If it's not too painful to remember.
It's not too painful, and I've documented it in the autobiography, so it's not like it's not out there, you know. You can edit this if you want.
Okay, we'll see.
Well, I was living in Earls Court at the time, and to get over the whole thing of being dropped by CBS and staying involved with music, I started playing in a lot of restaurants around London, all the fashionable eateries, you know, like April Ash's restaurant in Knightsbridge and Morton's in Berkeley Square and the Porters of Piccadilly and Last Resort. And I built, you know, it was all doing covers, all covers basically. But it actually just got me into the mindset of, well, basically failure. You know, I mean, I just felt that I'd failed. You know, my dream had not come true, and I was without a record deal. Creatively, I had no idea what to do. Completely stymied creativity for quite some time. Because what do you do? What do you write? Who are you writing for? I'm one of these people who have to write for something. I don't just write. I have to have a project, and I had no project. So that kept me going for quite a long time and paid me very well. I've never been paid so much money in all my life playing in all these restaurants. They paid very well. Great life, free food, beautiful food. You know, the high society of London and all that. So I loved it. And I had all the outfits, you know, which I bought during my Kid the Big One years ago. So I had the suits, so it's fine. But I moved into a flat with two Filipino boys in Earls Court. And Earls Court was then, you know, a really gay area. I mean, it's just like lots of clubs and bars and this and that. And these two Filipino boys were at the time, I say boys, they were in their 20s, early 30s actually. In fact, Jun was older than me. Jun had been a journalist in the Philippines, and Sid had been an art critic. And they had to get out because President Marcos, was like doing this whole shutdown of anything creative and anybody who wrote an article against him. So they'd escaped from the Philippines, living in London. One was a clerk, one was a cleaner, I think, just to make ends meet. And so I was sharing the flat with them. But they used to have this propensity to bring back gentlemen from the streets. And I usually was out when all this happened because I used to play in the restaurants till sometimes 1, 2 in the morning. So I'd get back quite late. By then, the guy had either gone or he was somewhere else in the flat. But this particular night, there was this chap that they brought back, a Russian sailor, who got very violent with them. I went to bed and just left them to it. Said, good night, you know, I've got an early start tomorrow. I'm at the restaurant at 11. Left them to it and was woken up at about 1 or 2 in the morning to my door being thrown open and one of the Filipino boys, Sid, rushing in and going, he's going to kill us, John. And I said, what do you mean he's going to kill you? He said, he's got a knife and he's threatening us with a knife and he's going completely berserk and smashing the flat up. And so I said, well, you know, just get in bed and just wait here and, you know, let's just see what happens. And then Sid came dashing in, and June came dashing in and said, have you got some money? And I said, well, I've just got paid by the restaurant. And it was on my sideboard. I said, just take it, you know, because if we give him money, he'll go. So I said, okay. So they took the money, and well, that didn't do the trick. So he then came in and grabbed hold of John and threw him out the room, and started coming towards us. And I just said, look, you know, just leave him alone. He's not doing you any harm. Go. He went out of the room, shut the door. So I climbed out the window, one of these big old sash windows, onto the balcony outside and thought, well, across the road there's a phone box, so I could jump down and I could go and call the police. Well, I landed so badly you can't believe. I mean, I just crushed everything. I just heard everything go, my whole body. Yeah, you could just feel it sort of just going. So I'm lying on the pavement, you know, like a tortoise, you know, upside down, not being able to move. At which point he came out and just stood over me and said, why did you do that? And I said, well, you know, I wanted to get out and ring the police. You're going to kill my flatmates. He said, I might have killed them. I would not have killed you, but I might have killed them. And I said, well, at least this has stopped that. So then he just walked off, whistling into the night, disappeared. And then Sid and Jun came flying out and tried to pick me up. I said, don't pick me up. But anyway, they did. He said, well, we've got to get you back in the flat. So they carried me up 2 flights of stairs, which probably didn't do me an awful lot of good, lay me down on the bed and, and rang an ambulance. And so the ambulance turned up and they saw the state I was in. And he said, we're calling the police because, you know, there's something really bad going on here. We can't not call the police. So they wrapped me all up in all these things and put me and took me to hospital. Rang the police, and the police came to see me, and I gave a statement and all the rest of it. So yeah, I was there I think I was in the hospital for about 2 months, and gradually did physiotherapy and learned how to walk again, because what really astonished me was how you can lose the memory of walking. I'd never known that, obviously. You know, you actually forget how to put one foot in front of the other, because I hadn't. I've been in bed for all this time. Used to do this bed rest thing, and I wasn't allowed to turn over. The nurses used to come and turn me over and then turn me the other way. Wasn't allowed to move. No pillows. Gradually, I was, you know, they sat me up, and then I said, well, if I can sit up in bed, I can sit up in a wheelchair. So I go around on a wheelchair around the hospital. And then I said, well, if I can sit in a wheelchair, I can sit in a chair. And then they took me upstairs and they did all this physiotherapy and learning how to walk upstairs. They have these little staircase things you learn how to walk. And the weirdest thing was learning how to get in and out of a bath again. They had a bath in this room. And so they could teach you how to get into a bath and out of a bath without harming yourself. It was a long, long process. It was many, many months. You know, I was on 2 sticks for a long, long time. So I was really lucky, really, because, you know, I mean, the doctor told me, you know, that much, if you damage your spine that much more, that's it. You'll never walk again. So I was really lucky from that point of view.
Fortunate, yes. And you've gained full recovery of all your faculty.
Yeah. I mean, everything's good. I mean, I have a lot of back pain now. My feet hurt a lot, but, you know, compared to not being able to walk, that's fine, you know.
Deal with that.
Mm.
Wow. Well, I mean, I'd like to include that, but you know, like you said in the interview, because I mean, it's very, very interesting story, to say the least. Interesting that you hooked up with Trevor Horn. You mentioned him earlier, who produced a couple of your singles in the late 70s. And then you also collaborated with Steve Levine, Free Culture Club. Any of those songs you still fond of?
I think I'm fond of them all, really. I mean, again, it was quite, working with Trevor was, again, different than I'd done before, because he wanted to move me away from being a singer-songwriter pianist. He said, you've got a great voice, you've got a great pop voice, but we need to do something different, because what you've done so far, you know, hasn't worked, basically. That was the opinion of everybody then. And so he said, we've got to try and give you a different sort of image. And I had just written this song with his then girlfriend, Tina Charles, in mind. I Could Breathe Again. I've written it specifically for her. And I said, you know, you live with Tina. Will you play this to her? And he said, yeah, sure. So he took the tape, and then the next day he rang me and said, you're doing this. And I said, no, I said, it's in falsetto. I've sung it purposely in falsetto for her. He said, no, it's great. You sing falsetto fantastically. He said, we'll do it with you. And so I said, all right. And Stuart, actually, surprisingly, was, you know, all for it. You know, I think he was happy that somebody was taking me back into some sort of fold, you know, like love what I did. So Jeff Downs played keyboards, who became one of the Buggles, as you know, with Trevor, and then went to Asia. And then Bruce Woolley played guitar, and he wrote Video Killed the Radio Star with Jeff and Trevor. Linda Jardine, who was the girl vocal Video Killed the Radio Star. She did the backing vocals with a guy called Kip Trevor, who was in like a heavy metal band later, or had been. I think he'd been in a heavy metal band by then. So we did the tracks, and Radio 1 loved it. It got played to death. It actually came second on some sort of listener panel of 5 records. Used to do this thing called listener panel. So 5 of their listeners would listen to 5 new records that week, and it came second to Donna Summer. She came first, I came second, and Diana Ross came third. So I beat Diana Ross.
Put that in your CV, right?
Absolutely. Then we did another single, which oddly, Dull Shiny Light, which Robin Blanchard didn't want, even though it was like a virtual copy, if you like, of I Can Breathe Again in terms of style. So SRT Records put that out, a little independent label at the time. How did I meet Steve? Oh, that's right. I then started writing. I was trying all these different things, and I started writing this thing about like a science fiction fantasy thing, and I envisaged it as some sort of album. They were really odd songs, really strange songs. I don't have any of them now. I've lost the tapes and everything, but remember they were quite strange. And I took them in to Nicky Graham at CBS, and I knew Nicky because he conducted the orchestra on the Apple sessions. He was actually conducting Paul Phillips's arrangements. And Nicky, as you probably know, he toured with Bowie in 72, 73. He was a keyboard player. And then went on to produce Bros, of course, many years later. So I took him to it, and he said, I love what you're trying to do, but the songs are not for me. He said, but I think you should just keep on writing, and something will come up. He said, but keep this whole sci-fi pop thing going, and just see what happens. So then I came up with a song called I Tune Into You, and he loved it, and we went in, and it was all synths and Prophets and drum machines, which I'd never done before. So that for me was great, all this new technology, 79, 80, it was great, the sounds that were coming out were fantastic. And that got a lot of plays. And then we did a song called Lonely I, Lonely Me, which got a great review in a couple of papers, got some radio play. But the guy that was helping Nicky out was Steve Levine. When Nicky had to go to a meeting at CBS or whatever, Steve would literally sit in the producer's chair. And Steve had been a tape op at CBS at the time, before that, and had just started producing his own songs and his own artists. So when those 2 singles didn't chart, CBS dropped me again for the second time. So Steve rang me the day after and he said, I want to record with you. I want to make records with you, John. So I said, that's great. So we went in and we did 2 singles. One called It's You I Want, and then And the World, and the other side was Call on You. And we had Graham Broad on drums, who did a lot of sessions for me. John Alder on guitar, who was with the Jags.
Yeah.
They were great records. They really well. I was playing piano again on those, which was nice, because I didn't play piano on any of the Trevor Horn songs. That was all Jeff and Dudley. She played keyboards on those. So nice to be back on the piano. And while we were working on some new demos together, and this would have been early '82, Steve and I, he was at the studios, Rondeau Music, that's right, at Parsons Green in London. The reception, we went out for lunch and we came back, and the receptionist said, there's a guy called John Moss waiting for you. And we didn't know who he was. And he said, he's got this band he wants to play. Steve. So, so Steve went out to see me and said, look, John and I are just finishing off these tracks, and when we've done them, come in and play as your tracks. And he said, yeah, that's great. Really, really sweet guy. He just sat on the floor and read and waited for us. And then when we finished, Stephen went and got him in, and he played us these demos of God's Clubs, and we just went, oh, this voice, this incredible voice. And then he showed us he had this folio of photos of Boy George. And, you just looking at them and listening to it, you just thought, well, this is a star. This guy is huge. And And that one little meeting changed Steve's life
Yeah.
forever, because he then went on to produce them, and the rest is history, you know.
I was going to say timing on that too. Just think if
Yeah.
Boy George had come around the time that you started, he would have run into the same brick walls, Oh, probably more so.
More so, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So with time, comes a little more understanding. You also recorded with Chris Rainbow, who's sadly passed.
Yeah.
I've always loved his vocals, especially
Me
with
too.
Alan Parsons Project.
Yes.
Yeah, I've always loved his vocals.
Lovely man too. I mean, just such a lovely man.
I've heard.
So musical, you know. He was in. I first heard Chris Rainbow when Capital Radio played Solid State Brain,
Okay.
which was his first single, and that was 70. That would have been the spring of '74. And in fact, it was when I was just starting the sessions at Abbey Road, and I was living literally around the corner from Abbey Road at that point, a little flat there in Hall Road. And Solid State Brain was the wake up record every day on the Kenny Everett show, and I just loved this guy's voice. It was just, and these harmonies and this production was just fantastic. But it was '78, I think, when I started working with Chris, and that was through Stuart, because Stuart had signed Chris when he was I can't remember, Hope Street, I think it was. I think it was in a band called Hope Street, and it was signed. They were signed to Chapels at the time, and Stuart had signed him. So again, Stuart kept looking for different avenues and different ways to try and get me. This is obviously before the Steve Levine years, and it would have been, I think it was after the Trevor Horn years. It was after the Trevor Horn thing, because Trevor went on to do Buggles, and so again, we needed something to do something. So Chris and I worked on about 6 different tracks together, and I was writing with another guy then. His name has gone out of my head, Roy. I can't remember his name. I haven't seen him since then. We wrote some songs together, went into the studios, Scorpio Studios, next to Capital Radio, did these tracks. Unfortunately, Stuart couldn't get arrested, nobody wanted them. But I heard back from Chris many years later, in about 2005, 6, 7, maybe around about then. He was then obviously living in the Isle of Skye. And he contacted me because he found me on MySpace, if you remember MySpace. And I put some of my tracks up that I'd just finished. And he contacted me on there, said, lovely new recordings. I have the original multi-tracks of those tracks we did together. If you ever want them, if you ever want to get them remixed, or ever want to put them out, let me know. And I didn't, we just carried on talking, and he didn't send them down to me, and I didn't really know what to do with them, quite honestly, because I liked them the way they sounded anyway. One of them did come out on a RPM CD, Staying at Home Kind of Guy. That came out as a bonus track. Can you hear me okay? The RPM one. But such a lovely guy, and he had this really bad stutter, if you remember, with stammer. And he used to send himself up all the time. He used to make fun of himself while he was trying to get a sentence out. So that sort of eased the atmosphere, right? Because, you never know how to react, or should you speak, or should you try and help, or whatever. And he just used to say, I'll get there in a minute, and then he'd get through. And I said to him once, what I don't understand is your records are so complicated. Your vocals, your harmonies, everything about the vocals is so fast. He said, yes, because when I've got a rhythm, there's no problem. It's only when I've got to make conversation that I start stammering. And so I said, well, why don't you just put this click track in your ear all the time, in a little sort of headphone thing? A great idea, but I'd go crazy. So that wouldn't work. But it's a good idea, John.
That's like, it reminds me of Mel Tillis, the country and western singer.
Okay.
He was a stutterer. But when he sang, he never stuttered.
No.
Yeah.
It must be it's the rhythm thing.
Yeah, it is. It is. It definitely is. That's very interesting. Yeah. Well, did you want to talk a little bit about your A&R work? For 15 years? Some of the artists that you worked with?
Yeah, I mean, A&R for me, by that time, so we're talking 80, because I sort of decided I was going to give recording up by 83, 84. I basically had enough, you know. I mean, I wasn't getting anywhere. So I was very lucky. I got a temp job at a music company, which did mail order music. But I managed to meet a lot of people in the music industry from all the big labels who licensed to me for these box sets that I put together. And that got me into different areas of the music business. So I went into licensing, I went into contracts, I went into marketing. And because I'd been an artist, and because any artist I met, the company, the record companies realised I had a rapport with them. And I was in my 30s by now, so I was never going to be the A&R guy that discovers the new culture club or anything. You know, it was always going to be of an older ilk, because I was too old to do the talent scout thing. They were all kids, you know. So the first project I got involved with, Virgin asked me if I fancied working with Madness on an album concept that they had. And this was like doing all the A's and B's over 2 albums. And they were lovely guys. And we got together, they invited me to their studios in Caledonia Road in North London. And then Lee and Christy Boy came to see me at my office, and we put together ideas and where to put the tracks and the sleeve, and they were fantastic. All the band used to come to the studios to meet me, and we'd get together and we'd have a little snack and a chat. They were so lovely. Really charming. So that got me into that whole sort of mindset of, well, if they wanted me to do that concept, maybe I can get into doing more music things, you know. And then Virgin again asked me to do a Culture Club album. So I did the Best Culture Club with Steve. And then I did a follow-up called Culture Club Collect, which was all the 12-inch mixes. And then I worked on a Barry Manilow album, Reflections, which sold 200,000 copies. And I met him afterwards, and he said, you know, I can't believe you sold so many copies of this album, because my sales were actually dipping a bit. And this was late 80s. He said, but, you know, Arista are really interested in me again because this has done so well. So thank you. This was really nice. So I don't know whether Barry will ever remember that story, but anyway.
You remember that.
And then I don't really know how I got into it, but I started coming up with ideas for albums. And one of them I came up with was Elkie Brooks, who I'd always loved. Elkie Brooks, loved her voice. Bought a lot of her records in the late 70s, 80s. And she wasn't doing it much in the way of recording there. She was still touring a lot. And I came up with this concept of putting her in the studio with the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra, doing ABBA songs.
Okay.
Now, that may sound completely bizarre, but in my head, I could hear her doing The Day Before You Came, and The Winner Takes It All, and because they wrote great songs. You know, they had a terrible image. They were all, at the time, they were considered incredibly naff, ABBA. Now they're just everybody's favourite. Everybody loves ABBA, you know. It's just like, wow, Mamma Mia, wonderful. But, you know, one forgets in the 70s, when they were huge, a lot of people looked down on them as being, you know, just chintzy, 3-minute pop nothings. But I love their songs. I thought they wrote great songs. So I don't know how I got it, but I got a husband/manager's number, rang and spoke to him. And he said, well, I'll put the idea to Elkie, but what you have to understand is she's quite plain speaking. So, you know, she'll tell you what she thinks. So I said, oh, fine. So we arranged a lunch, and I took Elkie and Trevor, Jordan, her husband, out for lunch. And she said, right, she's very northern, Elkie, which I didn't know. She's a real northern girl. Right, she said, first of all, I'm not doing any bloody ABBA songs. No bloody way am I touching ABBA. I said, all right, okay. But I love working with the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra. And what I want to do all my old hits, Nights in White Satin, Lilac Wine, all those big hits I had, I want to do those with the RPO. So I thought, well, that's great. That's fantastic. So we put her in, she went into Air Studios in North London. Beautiful studio. Got a guy called Tony Britton who'd done a lot of orchestrations for me for various other projects. I put together a couple of albums of the RPO play Songs from Les Miserables and from Miss Saigon, which were big sellers. And So Tony came and did all these amazing orchestrations, and Elkie sang live with the orchestra. And this tiny, she's quite tiny, and this tiny little lady in this huge room with this massive orchestra, belting out Nights in White Satin was spine-tingling. It was quite something. She got it in one take. One take. And at the end of it, all the violinists were banging their things and they were all clapping and everything. Fantastic. And it was a lovely album, and it actually went top 50. It was called Amazing. And I think it might have been maybe her last top 50 album or one of them. So I was very pleased about that. And then I started working with a lady called Maria Friedman, who was like a West End star. You know, she wasn't a recording star, but she'd won things like the Laurence Olivier Award, and she'd done a one-woman show in London. Amazing voice. It's a bit like Streisand sort of voice, but very West End musicals sort of. Big voice. Again, little girl, little lady, actress as well. So she could really act the songs on stage as well. And so I got together with her manager and we came up with, let's do the album of your show, not live, but let's put you in the studio and do all the songs you do in the show, which we did. Nigel Wright, he produced that, and that I asked him to do that because I thought he would fit nicely with Maria, because he did all the Lloyd Webber soundtrack albums and all that. So he understood, you know, this whole Western sound, the expansive sound. Beautiful album. And I did an album with Lonnie Donegan as well. Do you remember Lonnie Donegan?
Yeah, Skiffle, yeah.
Yeah. He approached me and he said, look, I'd love to do an album of some of my old songs, but I'd like to do some new songs that I've written. And I knew, but I'd kind of forgotten that he wrote hits in the 60s for like Tom Jones. He owned the publishing on Nights in White Satin, because I think Justin, the lead singer, Justin Hayward, I think worked for him at the time, or was a T-boy or something in his publisher's office or something. And he invited me to his flat in Paddington and sang these beautiful songs. I mean, they were I was astonished. And we're talking mid-90s there, so this guy, you know, been around for 40 years. And Van Morrison was a great friend of his, so Van Morrison did some duets on the album with him. And that came out, that was called Muleskinner Blues, and that came out sort of, well, mid-90s, I suppose. Another great album. So I worked with some lovely people, you know. As I say, it wasn't A&R as you think of A&R. It was more coming up with concepts for artists, you know, and working through the whole thing with them. So I liked it because it kept my musical creative thing going a bit, you know, without doing stuff myself, you know.
I was going to say, that sounded like you enjoyed that period.
I did.
Well, who is, fast forwarding a little bit, who is Matsui Takumi? And how is he instrumental in help regenerate your interest?
Ah, yes, I know who you mean.
Yes, yes.
In fact, you mean, where is it?
There's a book.
Yeah, where is it? So funny.
Like he has a copy.
I found it actually. Where is it? There it is. It's Search of the Lost Record.
Yeah.
Oh.
There we go. There we go. Put a little bit closer. A little bit closer. There we go. Search of the Lost. Okay. I had never seen the actual cover. Okay. All right. All right.
That's him. And it was Steve Levine who rang me about this, because he was at the Tate, Steve, and he rang me one day and he said, do you know that Kidney Big World is in this book called In Search of the Lost Record? It's one of the best album sleeves, like a piece of art. And I said, no. He said, well, I've just seen it at the Tate. I bought it and I'm leafing through and Kidney Big World's in there. So I said, well, so I went, I think I must have gone to touch and rung them or something, or maybe gone to the Tate, I can't remember now, but I got a copy. And sure enough, there it is. And around the same time, I got an email from a guy in Australia who said that he'd bought In the Big World at some market, some street market, loved it so much and thought it was a great album. So you're talking 2000, 2001 by now. And we'd moved to Pembrokeshire. I think we were living in Pembrokeshire by then. We moved to Wales. And so I thought, well, there's like there's some sort of undercurrent going on here. So I went on the internet, and sure enough, people were talking about Kid in the Big World on the internet. Just found this amazing album in this like rare record shop or something. Who is this guy? Is he still alive?
Right.
So with all this little bubble thing, and then I saw something, I can't remember what I saw, but again on the internet, and a guy called Anthony Reynolds, who was in Jacques, a band called Jacques in the 80s, 90s.
Right. Yes.
Great singer, wonderful songwriter. He was talking,
I wanted to, there's a song, yes, it reminded me, it's London Loves You.
which I covered.
Yes, I really like that track.
Thank
Okay,
you.
yes.
No, that's all right. I'm pleased you like that because I'm so proud of that track. I really am. And Anthony asked me if I would do it. He said, I want you to do this song. So yes, he'd written on the internet, as always, the song that I need at the end of the day is Kid in a Big World by John Howard and something. So I thought, well, with all this going on, maybe I should get in touch with my friend Ian McNair at Cherry Red, because I knew Ian from years ago when I used to license all his punk stuff for various albums I was putting out of punk stuff.
Okay.
And I really liked Ian, and he lived quite near me at the time. We were in Oxfordshire then, and so we used to go for lunch. By now I'm in Pembrokeshire. So I found the tapes of Kid the Big World in my big trunk of tapes and pictures and stuff, and booked a studio in Pembrokeshire, put it on, and then he copied it onto CD for me, sent it to Ian McNair, and I said, I'm getting all this internet activity and interest, and mentioned the book. Do you think there's any chance that you might be interested in putting this out, reissuing it? Because I own the tapes now, because by then all the masters had gone back to Stuart, and then Stuart and his partner passed them on to me, gave them to me. And about 2 weeks later, Ian rang me. I was in the car, and he rang me, and he said, I had no idea that you'd done this. None at all. Why didn't you tell me? I said, well, when you're meeting somebody to license a lot of punk tracks for them, you don't say, I used to make records.
Right.
And none of them sold. So, I had two lives, nobody knew about my Kid in the Big World years in those days. I just never used to talk about it. It was gone, finished. I was now in the music business, I was doing this, that, and that. He said, this is an amazing album. Why did nothing happen? I said, I don't know. I said, we could be here for days and I'd be talking to you about it. So he said, well, I definitely want to put this out. He said, but I don't want to put it on Cherry Red. I want to put it on RPM, because RPM is like our reissue label. He said, and I just think it would suit Mark Stratford and RPM so well. He said, so I've sent it to Mark, and he's going to get in touch with you. Well, he did, and he put it out in November 2003 on CD, and it all started again. Everything that happened in the 70s, it was the reverse. People loved Kid in the Big World, and it was astonishing to me, because I had basically decided it's gone, it didn't work, nobody particularly liked it, forget it, and suddenly, wow, incredible.
Yeah. Well, I have to say this about RPM, Cherry Red, RPM subsidiary. They are real champions for artists, bands from bygone eras that kind of flew under the radar, that
Yeah,
a little undiscovered
yeah,
gems, I would call them,
yeah,
like so, and they really do re-release a whole lot of really good stuff on that label, and it's good that you had that connection, yeah, earlier on with them.
yes,
I found out about a lot of different groups and artists through their releases, a lot of
yeah,
various artist compilations
yeah,
too. Maybe an artist that only had one single or what have
yes.
you. Yeah, they do a lot of that kind of stuff, unearthing a lot of these really, really. So they're really one of my top labels to go to,
Yeah.
finding out about a lot of this. So, so they did end up re-releasing all three
They
albums,
did. Yes, they did.
and this helped. This was kind of the impetus to help restart your music career.
Yeah. I mean, basically, because all three of them sold extremely well and got these rave reviews, which was lovely. I started kicking again, and Mark organised 2 or 3 shows for me. And then he went to Ian again at Cherry Red and said, look, John's obviously got a following now. And in fact, he probably had a following before he knew he had one. Looking at the internet, there was a lot of love for Kid in the Big World that even he didn't know about. But he said, now it's happened and these great reviews. The next obvious stage is for John to record a new album, for Cherry Red. And Ian McNair said, yeah, I think that's a great idea. So we went in the studio, and it was Andre Barreau on guitar, and he was the guy who played on Robbie Williams' Angels. He played guitar on that. And he also was George Harrison in Bootleg Beatles. He was George in the Bootleg Beatles. Great guitarist, lovely guy. And Phil King, who had been in El Brutus and Lush.
Yeah,
he
was it Lush? Right.
That's right. And he was a really good friend of Mark. So, and he also, apparently, Phil told me afterwards that as well as Ian McNair saying to Mark, you should put this out, he said, I was also lobbying Mark, you should put this out. This is Kid in the Big World, it's a great album. So that was really nice. So we'd done a couple of gigs together, and then we did, as I was saying, which were a lot of new songs. And earlier in the year, I did another album called The Dangerous Hours, with the lyrics written by a friend of mine called Rob Cochran, who's a poet in Manchester. So we'd done that together, but as I was saying, which had done nicely, got a lovely review in The Guardian, very funny review in The Guardian, The Dangerous Hours. He basically said, it's like John Howard is like an archaeological discovery. He's suddenly dug up from the depths and, and creating this new music. So as I was saying, had a good springboard because Dangerous Hours had got great reviews, and as I was saying, then followed, and that was the first album of all my, my own lyrics and music, a fully John Howard album, if you like. For 30 years, it was the first one for 30 years to actually come out. Anyway.
I wanted to mention a couple of 3 tracks off of that and get your 2 cents or your feedback. I think my top pick is "Expect the Unexpected."
Oh yes.
That's a great song.
I love that song.
And then "Without a Kiss."
Yeah.
And then "Blame the Night." I think those are my
favorites on Dangerous Hours. Yeah, it's a lovely project because again, I met Rob through RPM. He'd written to them when he saw Kid in the Big World review. I think he'd seen the review in Uncut, 5-star review. I stress that, underline that, my 5-star review. And so he got in touch with RPM and said, I bought Kid in the Big World in '83. I saw it in the market somewhere. And I love this album. I'm so pleased that RPM are putting it out again. I'd love to get in touch with John, but I don't want to get in touch with him cold. Could you contact him and ask him if he minds me writing to him? So Mark rang me and I said, yeah. I said, I'd love to hear from you. So we had a long chat on the phone, Rob and I, and I discovered he was a poet and had quite a lot of his poems published. And I said, maybe we should write something together. Maybe just send me some lyrics. Well, a week later, 3 exercise books full of lyrics turned up. I mean, hundreds of lyrics turned up, and I picked 14 and got on the piano. And I'd never done that before, actually written whole songs around somebody else's lyrics. But for me, it was actually a really good introduction back into songwriting in a funny sort of way. It was quite a gentle way of doing it, you know what I mean? And went into the same studios in Pembrokeshire again, recorded that on my own, played everything myself, sung everything myself. And then it got these great reviews in Uncut. Max Bell gave it a great review, and various other people in The Guardian, etc. So yeah, so as I was saying, it was like the logical extension. You know, let's give John the chance to write the lyrics, the songs, everything, and put an album out of those. And one of the tracks on there, the Dilemma of the Homo sapien, that ended up getting loads of university college radio play in America. I have no idea why that happened, but it became a playlisted track on university radio. Don't know which one. Might have been like a connection of different universities, but it suddenly got lots and lots of downloads because of that. You know, strange.
Yeah, like you said, and as the album, as I was saying, another three tracks I'd like to plug: "Magic of the Mystery,"
Oh yeah,
"These 50 Years,"
yeah.
and "A Kind of Aching." Is, those are the three that really
Oh, that's lovely. That's great. That's great.
stuck out to me on that one. Um, you were really, really, or have been, excuse me, very prolific in your output uh, over the last several years too.
Yeah, I think I always have been really. I mean, I was in the 70s. It stopped. The flow stopped because the interest stopped. Basically, you know. I mean, up to that point, I've been really prolific, but I think prolific's kind of my middle name, really. You know, I just.
I, I think so. Maybe you should go have it formally changed. Yeah,
John Prolific Howard.
yeah, there you go.
Love it. Love it.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, there's other. You know, I haven't listened to all of your albums, completely, but some of the other ones, like from Same Bed, Different Dreams.
Yeah.
Uh, Probably my favorite song on there is Over the Moon.
Oh yes.
Sacred Heart, another one I would plug.
Yeah.
Laura Coming Home. Now that I have to ask you, is that a composite or is someone that you knew? Or,
No, it's actually. Do you know a book called Cider with Rosie?
no, who's it by?
Oh, Neil, my husband Neil will tell me,
Yeah,
but I can't remember at the moment. Laurie Lee.
okay, it
She
doesn't ring a.
wrote Cider with Rosie, and it's very pastoral. It's a very pastoral book, and they did a TV film or series about it in the 70s, I think, and I had that in mind. Maybe I just read it again or something, but it was in my mind. And so this whole pastoral thing of Laura coming home in this sort of quite pastoral setting, and that just set me off. You know, I think Laurie Lee and Laura. I think probably those two names were sort of in my head a bit, and the whole image of that book. And so that's how that song sort of formulated. I mean, my songs write themselves. They literally come out of the ether. You know, I sit at the piano or I sit at a piece of paper, and lyrics happen. Honestly, it's not rubbish. You know, it's the truth. It's they just pour out of me, and then when I sit at the piano, they start to write themselves. I have very little. I feel I have very little to do with it in a weird sort of way. You know, it's like it's sort of like there, and I
It,
just need to just grab it. It's quite an odd sensation, right? The way I write songs, anyway, is.
I was going to ask you about that. Yeah, they're in the ether. Is there a particular time of day that you're a little more inspired than others? No, just
No, not particularly. What happens to me is phrases will come into my head for no reason, absolutely no reason. They'll just come into my head, and so I scribble them down on a piece of paper and put them in my pocket. My pockets are full of pieces of paper with all these bits of lines and stuff on them. And then gradually over time, they start to. It's not the same as David Bowie used to cut things out, and he used to cut lyrics out and then jumble them up, and that's how he wrote songs. It's not that particularly, but I gradually work out that would go with that, and that's nice, and that works out, and then the whole thing starts to come together. Um, but it's just this process, you know. But what I do find is when I've finished an album, I tend not to write them for about 6 months. Nothing happens. You know, it's like creative exhaustion almost, you know, because my albums take a year because I play, sing everything myself, you know, the drums, guitars, pianos, everything. all the vocals. So, and I'm a real perfectionist. I like to get everything sounding just as I hear it in my head. And if it isn't, then I'll just work forever on getting it right. Because to me, recording isn't live. You know, live performances are one thing. Recording is a completely different matter. You know, because you have to live with those recordings for the rest of your life. And if they're not as you want them to be, you've got a problem. You know.
Right. Yeah.
And I have having my own studio, and I have the luxury to do that. You know, I can work as long as I want, hours during the day, which I do at any time of day or night. The studio is in my garden, so I don't even have to get on a bus or drive anywhere. That was the one thing I think in the 70s, I never had that luxury. You know, you basically had a studio booked and you had to get the vocal right, and if it wasn't quite right, then that's that, you know.
You had that time constraint, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you did. Well, so would you say you prefer the composing and writing to performing live? Would you say that?
It's an interesting question because I have decided that I won't be doing any more live performances, and it's not because I don't like performing. I do. I love live performance. It's all the stuff that goes with it. You know, I've got to. I can never remember any of my songs. I have to relearn them all. And that isn't old age. I was 70 last week. It's not to do with that because I was the same in the 70s. I have to relearn them, rerouting them, which takes 2 or 3 weeks. And living in Spain now, my gigs are always in London usually. So then you have to put aside 4 days, you know, for the travelling, the rehearsal, the sound checks, the gig, going back, having a day in London, seeing friends and whatever. And that's become increasingly more difficult now because we have rescued dogs and cats, and so they need looking after while we're away. And we don't have anybody now. We used to have, but the dog sitter we used to have doesn't do that anymore. So the whole practicality and the logistics have sort of basically said to me that it's not possible anymore. If I could snap my fingers and be on the stage, I'd love it. And I love audiences. I love performing. Because when I perform, I talk a lot, as you've noticed. And I have stories, and I tell my stories and then do the songs. The last gig I did was 2019 in April, so 4 years ago, virtually exactly, with Simon Love and Vinnie Peculiar and Rogers and Butler, an American duo. Edward Rogers, who's I think he's got a DJ. He has his own show as well, a radio show. They just toured with the Zombies actually in the UK. Rogers and Butler. They just finished a show with the Zombies. And that was a great show. There was 4 of us on the bill. They decided I was going to close the show, which was very nice. So I did about an hour. And then at the end of the show, everybody came up on stage. All the musicians came up on stage, and we all did a rendition of Goodbye Susie together, which was fantastic. And the audience was singing along. And I remember at the time when it finished, and it was lovely atmosphere, great audience. I remember thinking that will probably be the perfect close to live performances because it literally is the full circle, you know. Goodbye Susie kind of started it, and you can't get better than all these musicians and the whole audience singing along. It just felt right. And then lockdown happened, of course, which obviously nobody knew. So I did do a home show. I did a couple of home shows, and I did a couple of live streamer things for Shindig magazine. They did this whole, like a festival, but done that whole. Paul Weller did a track, I did a track. But it's really the travelling, Greg. That's what kind of done it for me, you know.
The whole logistics of it and everything is be a real royal thing. Well, talk a little bit about John Howard and the Night Mail. How did that all come together?
That was a fun project.
Mm-hmm.
I enjoyed doing that. That came out of nowhere as well. A lot of things that have happened to me through my career are usually instigated by somebody else, which is always the best way anyway. And this was Robert Rottifer, who's an Austrian guitarist, singer, songwriter, journalist, painter, this polymath. He'd been introduced to my music by a guy called Darren Hayman, who was with a band called Hafnia. And I think he was also Raleigh Long, a singer-songwriter, great singer-songwriter, Raleigh Long. Also, he loved As I Was Saying, and he'd been named in an article about As I Was Saying by a journalist called Joe Lepper. So this whole sort of thing was starting to take shape. And then Robert asked me if I fancied being interviewed by him on his radio show. It's an Austrian language, it's a German language radio show called Heartbeat. Obviously I can't speak German, so the interview is in English. And so we did a phone interview. He phoned me from his home in Canterbury and I was in Spain. And at the end of the interview, he said, "Do you fancy performing live again?" Because I hadn't performed for a few years at that point. That was 2013, end of. And I said, "Well, I haven't really thought about it. You know, I'm now just recording basically and got my studio at home." And he said, "Well, you know, I'm doing a gig at the Seven Jazz Quarters in London, which is not in Dalston, and Raleigh's doing it as well. Do you fancy being on the bill with us?" And I said, "Well, it sounds quite nice." He said, "You know, just come and play some songs." And it's a nice gig, nice venue. And I said, "Well, that sounds interesting." He said, "But it'd be even better if you had some backing, wouldn't it?" And I said, "Well, yes, that would be quite nice." And he said, "Well, how do you fancy me backing you on guitar? And Andy Lewis, who works with Paul Weller, he'd love to perform with you, play bass for you, because he loves Kid in the Big World, the album." He said, "And that guy called Ian Button, who's got a band called Paper Nut Cambridge, he's a fan and he'd love to play drums. How do you fancy if we backed you?" He'd obviously planned up on this, but you know, it was very, very nicely done, very gently done, you know, sounding me out.
Right.
So I said, "Yeah," I said, "That sounds great." So he said, "Okay, well, let's do that. Let's perform together. Let's do that, and that'll be great." So Raleigh was the headliner. I was in the middle, and I think Darren did a set at the beginning as well. Darren Hayman on his own, and so got to London and met the guys, and we routine one evening, which went fantastically. They knew these songs like the back of their hand. Deadly Night, Shade, Goodbye Susie, Family. I mean, they just knew them. So I just had to turn up, play piano, and sing. Really, you know, I mean, it was as easy as that for me, really, because they were so good. And then we did the gig the next night. Fantastic, went really well, loved it. Got a good review too, got a very nice review. And then a few weeks later, I think it was Robert again. Robert said, "You know, how do you fancy writing some songs, you know, with us? We'd love to write some songs with you." I said, "That sounds like a nice idea." So, because I'm in Spain and they're in the UK, they sent me a lot of lyrics, the three boys, and I sent them a lot of lyrics. And then I'd write tunes to their lyrics, they wrote tunes to my lyrics, individually. And over the next few months, through 2014, we ended up with 10 songs. And I demoed them all. I put piano voice demos of them all together and sent them to the guys. Said, "You know, this is me and the piano doing the songs." So I said, "That's great, because we'd love to record them. And so these would be great demos for us to get your feel of the songs, you know, your piano feel and all the rest of it." So they booked studios in Ramsgate called Big Jelly, which is modelled on Abbey Road. So for me, it was fantastic. They had a staircase going up to the control room, which was great. And we had a lovely weekend in Ramsgate, a nice place. And we recorded it in 4 days. And then Robert, Ian, and Andy mixed and mastered it. Robert painted the sleeve.
I was going to ask, who did?
Great painter. Great painter. And then got in touch with Peter Records in Hamburg, who he probably knew because of his links with Germany and Austria, because he has quite a following over there, Robert. They loved the album and said, "We're putting it out." So that came out in August 2015, and we did quite a few gigs. We did one in London, we did one in Austria, Vienna, did a few in Germany. But what amazed me was the reviews. I mean, these reviews were like astonishing. I think we had 25 4- and 5-star reviews. And there's a thing called Metacritic that do this thing at the end of the year of the best reviewed albums of the year. It was 15th of all hundreds and hundreds of albums. It was 15th best reviewed album. And I thought, wow, this is incredible. What was quite amusing for me was that the reviewers generally, and the media, thought I'd done Kid in a Big World and then disappeared and done nothing
Right.
until the Nightmare album. So all those albums I've been doing at home didn't exist for them. They were completely oblivious. So it was like this huge comeback for this 70s artist who didn't make it. And suddenly here he is, 40 years later, recording again. So I put them all right about that. You know, I did get in touch and say, well, actually, I've done this and this and this. And they were all very sweet, and they added that in before they published their pieces. And Robert was very sweet, actually, because he said, it's my fault. I thought it was a much better story having this completely forgotten artist from the 70s come back with this album. He said, I thought that was a much better story. So forgive me, but, you know, it's called PR. So I said, that's fine. You know, don't have to worry about it. So, but it did get me a lot of new fans, especially in Germany, because the album went into a few indie charts, you know, and we released one of them as a single, Intact and Smiling, which I wrote with Andy.
Okay.
And that actually got in an indie top 10 in Austria. So a completely new following. You know, these little things all happen, and suddenly you've got more people interested in what you're doing. It just seems that if you spend a whole lifetime at this, you do eventually end up with quite a following, really.
Yeah, you know, and I think that's well, I want to in the light of fires burning. That's my favorite, I think, on that album. But
Mine too.
the I think that's my niche, however niche with this interview channel is those artists like yourself, you know.
Okay.
Yeah, and I seem to be interviewing and talking to a lot of people like that kind of for decades kind of, you know, were undiscovered or didn't get rediscovered, you know. And
Yeah.
so they've been like yourself, very welcoming in doing these interviews, you know, and it's been a rewarding experience, and I'm glad to be, you know, a little part of it, you know,
Right.
giving a little bit of exposure and what for what it's worth, you know, doing it.
Absolutely. No, it's lovely. And it's great to be invited to do these things because, you know, well, for a start, talking about yourself for quite some time is a very nice experience anyway, you know.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna say, to me, it's a no-brainer. You know, it's like, do you want to talk about yourself for, you know, an hour and a half, 2 hours, whatever? And most
Absolutely.
musicians would jump at that chance.
Yes. Yeah.
Oh, I would think so. Well, one more question here. Have you enjoyed writing your autobiographies or memoirs?
I
What
have
kind of?
very much, very much. It was very cathartic. It got an awful lot out
Right.
that had been in my head all my life, really, you know, and putting it down on paper, and then finding a publisher who wants to publish it. That because originally it began as I did it as a monthly chapter on Facebook and my website. It was like a little journal, an online journal. And a guy who read it knew Rick at Fisher King Publishing, sent him it, and just said, you know, I think this should be a book. This should come out. Thankfully, Rick agreed, and he contacted me and said, when you finished it, I want to publish it. So that's how that kind of started. And the first one, Instance Crowded with Life, that came out in 2018. And then the second one, Illusions of Happiness, which covered basically, that covered post my accident into the 80s. And that was called Illusions of Happiness. And the third one came out 22, yes, last year. And that was called In the Eye Line of Furtherance. And that was basically my career in the music business. That's what that kind of covers. And yeah, I mean, the response has been really lovely. And there's been 2 or 3 people who I knew back in the 70s I haven't seen, got back in touch with me through those books. They contacted the publisher and said, we haven't seen John for years, read his books, we want, you know, can we come? So I'm back in touch with some old friends, you know, because of those books. So that's quite nice too.
That's what it's about, you know,
Yeah.
reconnecting and connecting with an audience, and good music again is going to find an audience, whether it takes years and years.
Yeah,
That's why, and the younger crowd, even though some of the stuff that they're into these days I don't get, but there are those that have good ear for music,
yeah.
and quality music is it travels through time, and there's always going to be an audience for it. So
I agree. I agree. Good music will always come through.
well, one more. I lied. I said one question, but one more, and we'll wrap this up. But just last week, Kid in a Big World, the original demos, double CD came
Yeah.
out. Any reactions yet?
Really good reactions. I mean, it's a joy really for me because these demos have never been released, and I hadn't heard them myself for literally 50 years. They'd sat in my trunk, gathering dust, and when I sent them, I put this idea to Cool Cat Music. Why don't we put out King of the Big World plus the original demos because it's 50 years since I recorded them, so it's a nice little anniversary tag. And they said, yeah, great idea. So a guy called Javier Roldan here in Spain, he does cleaning up and restoring of very old recordings. And he did a beautiful job. I mean, fantastic, because, they had a lot of sound issues and they were old, they've been traveled all over the place. I mean, they didn't fall to pieces, which I thought they might do. At least they were in one piece, these tapes. But when I heard something like Kid in the Big World, the song, I was really shocked because it was such a different performance when I recorded it in '73 as I recorded it at Abbey Road with the swing orchestra. And even when I did it again at Apple for Paul, as he remembered the demo, which is basically me at the piano and singing, and it was more ballad and intimate. This demo was like Edith Piaf. I mean, it was really raw and like Jacques Brel, really going for it, and almost angry. Some of the phrasing. It's really, it's very French. It's like, and it was just. And I thought, I do not remember this. I do not remember performing. But that's how. When I recorded the demo in October '73, I'd written it in July, just before I left home for London. So it was a new song.
Mm-hmm.
And I was performing it that night as I'd written it. And then over the next 12 months, how it was gradually smoothed out, if you like, really astonished me. And the response to that from people has been, oh my God, this is fantastic. We had no idea of these tapes or these demos or the way you perform these things. Like maybe Someday in Miami is very, I think I said earlier, it's like very Roxy Music-y vibe, up-tempo little thing. But everybody only knows the Palm Court Orchestra version. They don't know these things. The only one I never had a demo of was Gone Away because I wrote that the day or 2 days before sessions at Abbey Road began. So I just played it to Tony. And he recorded it on his dictaphone. Dictaphone seemed to be all the thing for producers in those days.
Yeah, right.
And he just put it on his dictaphone. And then he went away and did an arrangement, which was, again, totally different from how I'd written it. So there is no demo for that. So what I've done is I've finished second CD of the demos with a song called Third Man, which was going to be on the album, but then Gone Away replaced it because Tony said, this should be. Gone Away was going to close the album. But then CBS changed all the running order around and changed it when it came out. So I put Third Man on. Third Man was influenced by Dave Brubeck's Take 5. It's in the 5/4 rhythm. And I remember writing it in '73. I'd been listening to Take 5 because I used to put that on a lot. And I was sitting at the piano doing the chords. And along came Third Man the song. So I thought, well, if I can't put Gone Away on there as a demo, but I do have the song Gone Away replaced, and nobody's heard it before. That's the lovely thing. Nobody, but a small handful of people back in '73, nobody's ever heard these. And I haven't heard them for, as I said, for 50 years. So they've been a real revelation for me too, that young 20-year-old ambitious kid doing these brand new songs that are like, you know, a few months old at the time. Hearing them all again and cleaned up and restored so they sound pristine. And so it's just had a great review in Shindig magazine, the album, which is lovely. And she actually gave Third Man a special mention, which was quite nice in the review. And I'm getting a lot of emails from people saying, you know, love this and fantastic, so glad to have these. So yeah, the response has been great. And the distributor from Cool Cat's distributor, keep ordering copies. So that's nice too. So it means that, you know, shops want it too. So that's nice.
They're selling well. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Well, John, I appreciate you again taking time out and
Pleasure.
getting together, and I'm glad that you like to talk. Okay, I for one, because it makes it easier for me. Right?
Yes.
I don't have to keep thinking of things to say and
I know.
that kind of stuff. So it makes it flow better. So I appreciate that, and you have a good rest of the. Well, you're getting late on a Sunday.
Yeah, it's 7:45 now, so we're going to have a little bit of dinner, then we'll take the dogs out.
Well, I appreciate it again, and I will let you know once I've got this edited, and I'll send you the link.
Great. That'd be great. I'll share it like mad.
All right, like mad, exactly. Sounds good, John. And I'm going to go grab something to eat too, and we will be in touch. Okay.
Well, that's great. Well, thanks again, Greg. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for inviting me. It's been a real pleasure.
Well, I'm glad it has been. It has been for me too.
Okay. You take care and have a good day.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, John.
Bye-bye.